Welcome to Flat, Cool, and Acid-Free, an OK State Archives podcast, bringing you stories about Oklahoma State University and Oklahoma. I'm Nina Thornton, multimedia producer for the OSU Libraries. On this episode...
And it was really kind of the new center of campus. As the center of campus was moving from Old Central eventually to the library, this kind of became a temporary center as it was moving to the north and west.
Bonnie Cain-Wood and David Peters talk about the history of OSU's Student Union.
Now, David, today I think it's easy to imagine that the union was always here, but we know that's not the case. When did we actually break ground on the student union, and how long was it before it was open to our students?
So they broke ground in the summer of 1948, and so it's after the war. GIs have begun returning and their families. So summer of 1948, the first official opening activity was September 9th, 1950. So it took them a little over 2 years to complete the initial construction of the Student Union building.
Wow. Now, okay, so 1950, there's a lot of OSU history prior to that. So what did students do? Where was the home of all of our student activities before we had a union?
So before 1910, there's no even residence halls on campus, and so students just come here for class mostly. There are very few locations for them to gather and socialize. Most of those were off campus. But beginning in the teens, the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, used a room in the basement of what was Williams Hall. It was that castle-looking building in the southwest part of corner of campus. So they used a facility down there to open up a YMCA. That is served as kind of the social gathering point, especially during the early 20s, until they completed a building called the Y Hut, the YMCA Hut. And the YMCA moved their social activities and their rooms and stuff to this little wood frame building, which is right across from where we are now. It's just north of where the Student Union is. It's roughly where the classroom building is now. Okay,
so the Student Union has always been in this location, but in 1950, the area around it probably would have looked a little bit different. What else was here in 1950 when the building opened?
So when the building opens, the classroom building is still under construction. It's almost completed. The library is just beginning construction, and so it's just started. Where the old business building is now, but there was a former engineering building at that location. And then Gunderson was where it is now. Most of the things immediately around haven't changed too a lot. Whitehurst Hall, Theta Pond, all that has remained the same. But now we've added, of course, the Alumni Association building. But this immediate area, classroom is under construction. That old civil engineering building is still being used before they build the business building, which is another 15, 20 years later. And then most of the area north of us, Hanner Hall was located just to the north and east of us. So it was really kind of the new center of campus. As the center of campus was moving from Old Central eventually to the library, this kind of became a temporary center as it was moving to the north and west.
So David, let's double back to the construction for just a minute. How was that original construction of the Student Union funded?
So they begun proposing a union as early as in the 1920s. President Bradford Knapp had proposed a union. Bennett, when he first gets here in 1928 as a part of his 25-year plan, proposes a student union. But of course we had the Depression, and so funding was a critical issue for them, and they were having trouble getting state support for what was considered a social gathering point for students. And so eventually they're able to get some bonds, revenue bonds, raised for the construction of the facility.
Great.
And that didn't happen until the mid-40s, after World War II.
Okay.
So about 46, 47, I think they finally get the bonds approved for construction.
So if they had bonds, what revenue streams did they intend to use for repayment of those?
So they initiated, and student approved of this, a student fee. And so student fees were going to cover roughly half of the annual payment for the bond. They also anticipated the hotel would raise funding. They also anticipated increased food services that they would provide, and the bookstore. They had revenue streams from the bookstore before. I mean, they knew how much the bookstore was bringing in. And then they worked with several other universities that had similar kinds of structures on their campuses to determine what the hotel would bring in and what the food services area would bring in. And so combined with that with some retail shops that went in, and other areas like the pool area, the billiard area, and the bowling alley downstairs, they had a series of revenue streams that then they could merge all together then to make the payments on the bonds.
Great. So that's actually a nice transition for one of our audience questions. William wants to know, what happened to that bowling alley?
Well, so the bowling alley was quite popular for a number of years, but then its popularity began to decline into the 80s and 90s. And so I know with this latest construction, it was removed, but actually had been removed before that. It just wasn't as popular, and so and there was more competition for social activities too by the 1990s and early 2000. But you have to remember, initially, students had begun living on campus, and so there weren't a lot of other options for them. And in a number of years, students couldn't have vehicles either. They couldn't have cars. And so they had to be within walking distance. And so things like the bowling alley and the billiard hall, pinball machines, social things like that were all very popular, especially in the 50s and 60s.
Sure. Anthony asks, was there a street in front of the Union? So we kind of talked about what used to be here. Have the roads changed as well?
So Washington Street ran straight through campus. So if you just imagine going straight through campus, hitting the library and keep going. Initially when the Union was completed or under construction, Washington Street was still open.
And Washington Street is that bit that we affectionately call the Strip, right?
The Strip,
yes.
Right. So the Strip heading north, and that ran right in front of the Union. That would be on the west side of the Union. With the construction of the library, which they started construction late 40s, early 50s, as soon as they finished construction of this building, they closed Washington Street. They used it for a while as really kind of a conduit to get materials to the library and to the building, but it was no longer used for public use after this library was completed in 1950. But that's where Washington Street, so between where the Union and the Formal Gardens are now, was where Washington Street ran. So
when were the Formal Gardens put in?
Well, those were actually started long before the Union was ever put in. So they were there, they existed before the Union came in. And they had to reconfigure them a little bit. But if you look at images of the Formal Gardens before the Union and after Union, they transferred that same dynamic to any adjustments they made. The Formal Gardens have been there for quite a while.
Looks like we have a couple questions coming in from our audience, so let's go ahead and ask a few of those. Tom wants to know, is there truth to the rumor Bennett wanted US 51 to run through campus?
Well, initially, when they first started planning both this facility and the library, and this was in the late 20s, early 30s, enrollments were only about 2,500 to 3,000 students. And so what they had envisioned was something like Lincoln Boulevard in Oklahoma City that goes down and then around the Capitol and then continues on. So initially they had envisioned that 177 would go through, not 51, but 177 would go up Washington Street. And so it would go past what would become the Union, around the library, and then continue on. So it was 177 and not 51 that they had envisioned going through. But of course, by the time the building is completed and the Union, enrollments had increased to, I think, close to 10 or 12,000. Well, that would have been just a logistic nightmare between classes. Can you imagine a major state highway with traffic? And it was just impossible. But initially, yes, they had planned for State Highway 177 to go run through campus, and it would have turned right off of 51, which is on 6th Street. So from 51, you would have gone on 177 north through Washington Street, through campus, and then on north. Thanks, Tom.
Linda asks, when was the theater built in the Student Union?
So that came in that next edition. So the initial construction was completed in the 1950s, and then by the early to mid 60s, they begun plans for the addition to the east. It was on the south side, and that's when the theater was added. I think the theater holds about 450, but they reconfigured some of the office areas and some of the lounges, and that's when they developed the theater area. And I think it has a lounge near it also, and also reconfigured some of the other activities that were located in campus in the Union. Those have changed over time too. So.
Samantha asks, what are our hosts' favorite memories of their time at the Oklahoma State University Student Union? So, David, what is your favorite memory of the Union?
So it's my first memory really of the Union, and when I was a senior in high school, we had our high school dance up in the Starlight Terrace, and that was also happened to be the first date I had with my girlfriend. We were boyfriend and girlfriend then, but it was our first date, and she's now my wife. And so that's my favorite memory of the Union. It was my first time here. I'd never been in Starlight Terrace before, and so that's still kind of a special location for me.
And how long have you and your lovely wife, Sarah, been married?
We've been married for 35 years, and we've known each other for over 40 years. So.
Well, I feel like my favorite student union memory is very similar. My husband and I actually got married in the Atherton Hotel here at Student Union. So that would have to be my favorite student union memory.
Good. I also used to go bowling in the bowling alley.
Did you?
I was on a bowling team, and that was also fun. And then I enjoyed the stateroom and now the Ranchers Club. But I enjoyed brunch. Sunday brunches in the stateroom was always a special treat. So.
Juliana asks, did Frank Eaton shoot his gun in the French Lounge?
It wasn't in the French Lounge. I think it was either the basement or the first floor. Frank had come to campus. B.B. Chapman was a history faculty member here, and he would invite Frank to come and talk about kind of his experiences at Oklahoma history. He retired in an Oklahoma history class. And Frank traveled with a loaded revolver, and Frank was known for his quick draw. Of course, Frank is in his late 80s, early 90s by this point in time, and apparently while attempting a quick draw, it was in some room of the basement, or I think it was the basement, but and it was in a hallway, I believe, but he drew quickly and fired, and the bullet did lodge in the floorboard, the trim around the floor. There were attempts to some people wanted to put like a marker there, but the student union director at the time felt that was probably inappropriate. They covered up the hole, and they pulled the bullet out, covered up the hole, and just pretended it didn't happen. And it was a security issue, and I don't think Frank ever, that was the only incident I know of.
All right. Another question we have from our Facebook audience. Samantha wants to know, has the Atherton Hotel always been a part of the Union? Is it part of the original plan?
Yes, initially it was called the Union Club, but yes, the Atherton, that section has always been a part of the Union. They felt it was critical both for the revenue stream that involved, also for the need that they felt was on campus, and they also tied in also with the hospitality academic areas, and so they integrated a lot of those things with the hotel. So that's always been a significant part of the Union, and it's been there, like I said, several renovations, but it's always been a part of it. One additional addition to the building in a way was the student union parking garage, and that came in the late 60s, early 70s, but also a way to provide additional parking on that side of campus. So I forgot about that addition.
Well, speaking of additions, if you've been to campus over the last few years, like David and I have, or if you've just come back and visited our campus, then you know that the Union recently underwent a transformational renovation, but that hasn't been its only major change. Can you tell us a little bit about how the building has grown? What kind of eras of additions have we had over the years?
So I'll kind of summarize this. So you have the original construction completed in the fall of 1950. You have the wing that was added in the mid-60s that includes the area where the Little Theater is now. So it connects the Little Theater to the initial main wing. Then you had the parking garage that came in a little bit later. And then, of course, now we have the area where the registrar and the bursar, but a lot of the student services were pooled together in that wing that sits between the Union and the journalism broadcasting, that area. That at one time had been kind of a sunken garden area. But that area then was repurposed, and that building addition was added to it. And it has that large atrium in the center. So those are the main enhancements to the building over time. And each time, of course, they do that, offices shift and functions shift. But it still maintains itself as a center for student activities, student organizations, meeting rooms, meeting areas, food services. It still provides a lot of the things that had initially been planned for, even as it's modified. It's both interior and exterior throughout the years.
Okay, we have another question that's kind of renovation focused, and hopefully we're not going to stump the archivist on this one. Matthew wants to know, was the Student Union Tower that's being renovated now always part of the Union, and what is it made out of?
So it's always been a part of the construction. It was part of that first section that was completed in 1950. I think the top was copper.
Okay.
But I'm not positive. I'll have to check on that. I know they're renovating it now. And someplace I've come across the gentleman who was part of building that tower. I can't remember his name, but we have either his story or an oral history or something. I've seen something about his affiliation with that tower, and I think it was copper. And I'm not sure what they're planning with. Maybe they're going back with copper, and it may be copper that had the patina.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Well, we'll have to do a little more research
on that one.
Post an update in the comments a little bit later.
We will find out.
People want to know. Okay, so you've talked about how the physical building has changed. How has the building's functions evolved?
So things like the bowling alley is gone, and so you don't have those kinds of gaming activities. But the little theater they're still used for speakers, for movies. They'll have events in the theater. The ballroom still gets used for not only dining and dancing, but there are groups that meet there for presentations. There are exhibits that take place in that area. The hotel, still is used for guests on campus. I mentioned, the alumni have now moved out, and the foundation's moved out, so those offices have been reconfigured for other purposes. And I think with this latest renovation, they tried to return student utilization as a top priority. So it's a center for a lot of social activities on campus, and not just students, but they wanted to make sure that students had an integral part in both the expansion of the building. With this bump out that we're in right now, was a part of this latest expansion to the north. But it still serves as a home for offices for organizations and activities all across campus, and a meeting place for people on campus.
We have one last question from our Facebook audience. I've kind of been saving this one because I thought it was a nice one to end on. John asks, is the Student Union still the largest and most comprehensive student union in the country?
So it probably depends upon how you would measure it, whether it's floor footage or cubic footage. I think it would be very difficult for anyone to contest us on that, but we are one of the most significant unions anywhere in the United States. We, I think, provide a number of different services and have for over almost 70 years now for our students in the center part of campus. And so I think we are, if not the biggest, one of the biggest, and proud of, I think, of the service that the union provides to our students, faculty, and staff, and the community.
This episode was part of the Archives Live, a monthly video broadcast. Watch the broadcast and stay in touch with the Archives by liking and following the Oklahoma State University Archives Facebook page. Find a link to the page in the show notes. This episode featured Bonnie Cain-Wood and David Peters. Hosted by Nina Thornton and produced by Samantha Mackey. Theme music is It's a Process, composed by Ben Stone and Finley Green and published by BBC Production Music, PRS. From the folks at Oklahoma State University Libraries and the Archives, thanks for listening. And always remember to keep your archival material flat, cool, and acid-free.